Hello, listeners. This is Kat. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This will be the continuation of Fall Apart, Collect the Pieces. This will be Part 7, Chapter 9. He sat in the locker room for a long while after he'd changed. He knew he shouldn't, that it would only bring him down, but he spent time scrolling through Twitter, watching as people who'd believed in him express their disappointment. He'd lost 10,000 followers in 6 hours. He knew it didn't matter. All that mattered was that he did his job, protecting people, no matter what they thought of him. Still, it hurt to see. It hurt to know how easy it was for people to assume the worst of him, and to claim they'd seen it all along. I knew someone who cries that much had to be a fucking weirdo. Imagine being a complete man-child. Hirodeku should be fucking ashamed to call himself a hero if he prioritizes junk above people. Yo, choosing plastic over person is whack. The list went on and on. With each tweet he read, he felt a little sicker. Ochako had made a power move, relying on Izuku's better nature to claim the narrative for herself. He almost wished he'd struck first, but that's not who he was. He didn't want to see the day where his faith in people changed. He didn't want to look for the worst. He wanted to assume the best, even if it ended up hurting him. He didn't want to change himself because of other people's mistakes or cruelty. He hadn't done it for Shigaraki, and he sure as shit wouldn't do it for Ochako. Sighing, he slipped his phone into his pocket and his earpiece into his ear, checking in with dispatch. Then he made his way onto the streets, head held high. As he started his route, he could feel himself being shunned and shamed. He could feel their stares on his back as he walked and heard their whispers. It took a few hours for the civilians to get brave, heckling him out loud as he patrolled. At first, it was from afar, yelling from across the street. "Loser!" one bellowed from a cafe patio. Another taunted him from an open office window. "I thought only elementary school kids got divorced over toys." He didn't respond. He didn't even turn in their direction. He pretended not to hear the two women loudly gossiping about how sorry they felt for Aravati, who had a spouse that was so tight-fisted that he sold her belongings when he didn't approve. The irony. "On 2 pro-hero salaries," she scoffed. "What's his problem? Why are his expensive hobbies okay but not hers?" "Millions on tacky crap that probably cluttered their whole house," her friend agreed, looking directly at him. He could feel her glare on the side of his face. "At least those toys probably went to kids who actually need them. He's so petty." "You'd never guess from the way he acts," the first woman sighed. "Serves us all right. We're being fooled by that do-gooder routine. Nobody's that nice unless they're hiding something." His jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything, continuing his patrol. He didn't need them to like him. He didn't even need them to be polite. He just needed them to be safe. He repeated the mantra in his head, even as his heart bled freely. Keep them safe, keep them safe, keep them safe. His first dispatch call was at 10 a.m., a car chased 3 blocks over with a villain who created illusions. He leapt across rooftops to arrive on the scene, arriving just in time to yank 2 civilians out of the way before dashing after the car and grabbing it by the rear bumper, stopping it in its tracks. He scowled when he opened the driver's door to be met with an illusion, mint-condition collector's items spilling onto the street, drawing whispers from the spectators. He slapped a quirk-canceling cuff on the villain's wrist, pulling him out of the car. "Nice try," he drawled. "But I wouldn't let a villain go just because I like collectibles." That was the second villain, who had the nerve to judge him, scoffing at him. "Why not? It's enough for you to divorce someone." "I'm not discussing my failed marriage with you, but thanks for your concern," he replied dully. He led the villain to the police, filling out paperwork, even as officers sneered at him. He tensed when he heard the custodial officer speaking to the villain, informing him of his rights before asking, "Did Hirodeku cause you any harm in response to your illusion?" He schooled his features before he glanced over, offended at the implication. His stomach dropped at the look on the villain's face, like a brilliant idea had occurred to him. "He basically yanked my fucking arm out of its socket," the villain wailed, clutching the arm in question. It was complete bullshit, of course. Izuku had taken his upper arm to guide him out of the car, only using as much force as was required to remove him from the vehicle. "And when he stopped your vehicle, did you sustain any injuries in the chase?" "I thought I was going to die," the villain declared. "I'm almost positive that I have whiplash. He's barbaric." The officer looked at him, scowling. "Would you like to file an excessive force complaint with the Hero Commission?" she asked. "What will that do?" the villain asked. "I'm scared he'll retaliate." "It won't mitigate your sentence for any crimes committed, but it will entitle you to compensation upon your release if he's found to have unnecessarily endangered or injured you, and if he attempts retaliation, he'll have his license suspended." When the officer looked back over at him, it looked like a threat, like if he tried anything, she would make it her mission to bring him down. He didn't react. He hadn't done anything wrong. He simply handed the paperwork back to the officer who had handed it to him, Officer Kaneko. They'd worked together on a joint task force before, and they were friendly acquaintances. He, at least, looked concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as he took the clipboard. "No," he replied with a grim smile. "But I don't need to be okay to do my job. I have faith it'll all sort out." "Take care of yourself," Kaneko said. "I figured the tabloid doesn't have the whole story. Don't let people who don't know the truth bring you down, all right? Tabloids will publish anything to make sales." He smiled, thin and tired. "Thanks, Kaneko," he replied. "I'm just hoping it'll blow over." He left the concerned officer in his wake, tuning out the custodial officer who was explaining the hero complaint process to the histrionic villain. He knew the commission would rule in his favor, especially once medical reports came in. There was no need for him to stew on it. Instead, he went looking for the civilians he pulled out of the car's way. He found them, a young couple being interviewed by a sensationalist reporter from a network more focused on celebrity news than true news reporting. They looked perplexed by whatever she was saying, casting disconcerted glances at each other. He approached from behind the camera, his heart lightening when the blonde woman caught sight of him and brightened. Her girlfriend was speaking into a mic, words halting and confused. "I don't understand. Are you hoping that I'll be angry that Deku just saved us? My fiancé would be a pancake if he hadn't intervened." "But you have to admit, his interference was reckless," the reporter cooed. "Witnesses say that he shoved you out of the way and kept running, failing to even check on your well-being." "Well, he was in the middle of a car chase," the blonde one drawled. "But he came back when he was done, so I think he's done his job pretty well. We're not dead, and I assume the villain was caught." The camera swung around at that, capturing him in all his miserable glory. "Hero Deku!" the reporter exclaimed, turning her mic toward him. "Your colleagues have expressed concern that your reactions in situations that don't go your way is not only infantile, often with extreme emotional outbursts, but also a detriment to your judgment as a hero. What do you say to the rapidly growing sentiment that your judgment in crisis can't be trusted?" He forced himself not to flinch. "I appreciate your questions and understand that you're doing your job. However, I'm currently on duty and in the process of following up with the victim of a villain incident. Please forward your questions to my PR team, and I'll be sure to answer them if I deem the question appropriate." "And how will you deem it appropriate?" the reporter asked, with a simpering smile and a cloying note in her voice. He smiled, small and tired. "I understand that my personal life is currently on display, but it is personal, and at least on my end, I intend to keep it that way." "It's no longer personal if Aravati and other heroes express their concern for your ability to make decisions in difficult situations. That's a matter of public concern. Aravati is entitled to handle the situation however she sees fit. I am choosing to keep my personal life separate from my work, even if the people around me do not," he explained, tone exhausted. "Your reluctance to provide comment or rationale is hardly reassuring," the reporter needled. Izuku looked her dead in the eye, and she faltered. He'd always worn his emotions on his sleeve. He was known for it. It must have been jarring to see him so blank. But that's how he felt. Blank, hollow, tired. "Until such a time that the Commission deems me unfit to be on duty, I intend to continue protecting civilians in public and protecting my heart at home. I'll thank you to respect that decision and allow me to do my job by checking on the welfare of civilians that were recently in the path of a dangerous car chase. Preventing me from ensuring their welfare is not only unprofessional, but dangerous. Please stand aside." There must have been something in his voice, or his face, that told them they'd found his line. They stepped aside, the reporter stepping out of the camera's way. Apparently, they'd be recording him whether or not he gave a statement. "Good morning," he greeted the couple, pulling on a smile. It was small and tired, but genuine. "I'm sorry your morning was disrupted. Were either of you injured during the course of the incident?" "Just a couple scrapes," the brunette fiancé had assured him, returning his smile. "You got there just in time. Thank you." "I'm glad," he replied. He popped open a sleeve on his utility belt and pulled out 2 business cards. "But if you find yourself with any injuries or property damage in relation to the incident, please reach out by any means on this card. We'll send you a form to request medical or property reimbursement from the state, and our agency will sign off on it." "Thanks," the brunette smiled, taking the cards and passing one to her fiancé. "I think we're set, though." "Then one last order of business," he said, smiling a little brighter. He was glad they weren't hurt. He'd been a little frantic. He opened his comms. "Dispatch. Taking civilian information from a villain incident. Called in at 10 a.m. "Thank you, Deku. Please have them state their names and date of birth," the dispatcher replied. He repeated the instruction to them, and they replied, polite and concise. When he was finished, he thanked them for their patience and reminded them that they could call his agency for any questions or claims regarding the incident. He then turned to leave, ready to flee the camera that had been trained on him since he arrived, but he was interrupted, the blonde fiancé running up to catch up with him, calling his name. She rubbed the back of her neck, lowering her voice as she flushed with embarrassment. I'm a big fan. Do you think you could sign the card? She asked, holding it out to him. He smiled, taking it and pulling a pen out of his pocket. He scribbled his name over the face of his logo. Thanks for believing in me, he murmured. It means a lot. They waved as he left, bouncing off the brick walls of the buildings to climb onto the rooftops. It was only 11 a.m., and he already needed a break from the uninformed judgment and critical eyes. He was so tired. Deku. Katsuki growled over the comms, making him flinch. What the fuck? He demanded. What's wrong? He asked, already alert. A villain reported you for excessive force, he snapped. What the fuck? I didn't, he shrugged, sitting on the building's ledge and peering down at the street, scanning for trouble while he took a breath. Street footage and cop cams will show that, as will his medical records. It's not ideal, but he has the right to file a complaint. Not if the complaint is bullshit, nerd, he snapped. Filing a false claim is fraud, and he'll be punished for it accordingly, he replied. I'm more worried about the fact that the custodial officer is the one who suggested it. The line went worryingly silent. Come the fuck again? Katsuki growled, low and furious. She's probably one of Ochako's more intense fans. Either that or she's been in a similar situation, and she's projecting her experience onto me. Either way, she clearly had a problem with me, he sighed. They'd had a month of classes with the business course at UA, largely covering media psychology. It was a move UA made to teach their rising heroes the importance of PR in their careers. He'd never thought he'd end up using it like this. It's completely fucked, Deku. Maybe you should head back and lie low until PR gets the memo out to other agencies and local precincts. I'm still fine, he replied, somehow lying and not lying at the same time. It sucks, but I'm managing. If it were me, you'd tell me not to work until I break down, idiot, he snapped. You tell me to take the time to heal and take time getting into my usual shit. He had a point, and Izuku knew it. If it gets any worse, I'll call off. Who's on call? He asked. Shitty hair, Katsuki replied, gruff and annoyed. I have desk for the rest of the day, so fucking call me if you need something. Don't do your usual suffer in silence bullshit. Yes, sir, Dynamite, sir, Izuku drawled. He could practically see Katsuki flipping him off. I'm going back down to street. Deku, I mean it, he said, soft and serious. If you need anything, I'm in your ear if you need me. His heart clenched, warm with the knowledge of how Kachan cared. I will, he promised. A moment later, he was scaling back down to the ground to resume his patrol. He took a few more dispatch calls, one villain knocking over corner stores and another stealing cars with a shrinking quirk, turning them to the size of a tic-tac and stowing them into his pocket. He dealt with them swiftly, leaving as little room for ambiguity as possible, and resuming his patrol before anyone could get in his face. He just wanted to get through it, do his job and go home, protect people, then take care of himself. His last dispatch call came in at 1 p.m. He was called to an apartment building where a little girl accidentally activated her quirk, liquefying an entire brick wall and causing a collapse. He arrived first on the scene, only stopping to ask the responding officers how many people were unaccounted for before moving in. There were 3 people lost in the rubble, a kindergartner on the first floor, a 36-year-old mother of 2 on the 4th floor, and a 19-year-old computer programmer on the 10th floor. He worked his way from top to bottom, knowing he couldn't shift the rubble without support. He could hold some of it still with Black Whip, but the further down he went, the more unstable it would be. He managed to pull the engineer out of the wreckage by himself, floating above the rubble and pulling concrete and brick away, piece by agonizing piece. By the time he got to the mom on the 4th floor, Shiozaki had shown up, uncommonly terse, but shoring up the rubble with thick, sturdy vines. With her help, he managed to enter the building, shifting through the unstable structure to look for the mom. He floated her back out when he found her, carrying her to the medics that had congregated at the police line. Can you show me a blueprint and where the girl was before the collapse? He asked. The officer didn't reply, blank-faced, as he pulled out a tablet and swiped to a floor plan of the building, marking out where the girl's apartment was. She'd gotten away from her mother as the building collapsed, running back inside to save her cat, not knowing that her mother had let the cat out when she'd come home from work. Shiozaki, he called, approaching her. Do you still have those pulse beacons? I can go in and tell you where to stabilize. She didn't reply, cold and disapproving, as she dug through her pocket and pushed a handful of dime-sized discs into his hand. He'd forgotten that Shiozaki was religious, He was pretty sure she disapproved of divorce entirely, though she seemed at ease with the LGBT plus community, so he wasn't sure where she drew the line. A thought experiment for another time. He gave her an uncomfortable nod before getting to work, pulling his mask up and entering the building again. He placed the pulse beacons carefully as he descended slowly, making his way to the mostly collapsed first floor. He knew the girl was alive thanks to the thermal scans. He just had to keep it that way. He finally reached their apartment, and he could hear her, calling for help in a raspy voice. She'd probably inhaled dust from the rubble, and there was a good chance that she was injured. "Kiko," he called, voice modulating through the mask. Her volume increased, calling out for help. He heard the rubble shift. "Kiko, honey, you need to stay still for me, okay?" "Help me," she sobbed. "Please help me." "I'll be right there," he promised. He placed another beacon, waiting for Shiozaki's vines to snake up through the ground and form a support pillar. He was pretty sure she was nearing her limit, so he had to be judicious about where he had placed the next one, carefully testing each step before he took it. He crept toward the girl, who was right on the other side of a partly collapsed wall. Her leg was pinned under a metal pipe that was wedged beneath furniture that had fallen from the floor above. She was lucky that she hadn't been crushed by the wooden rocking chair that had her trapped. He finally made his way to her side, taking in her panicked face. "Hi, Kiko. I'm Deku." She looked up at him with wide, teary eyes, her face covered in dust and hair flaked with debris. "Please help," she sniffled. "That's what I'm here for," he promised. "I'm going to put this mask on you so that you can breathe better, all right?" When she nodded, he peeled his mask off to put it on her instead. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. My leg," she sobbed. He looked closer, repressing a wince at the unnatural angle. "And I feel sick." Probably a head injury. He felt at the back of her head, finding a contusion on the side of her head that felt painful. "Okay," he smiled. "I need you to stay still while I get your leg out. Then I'm going to bandage you up and get you out of here, all right?" She nodded again, and he set to work, placing another pulse beacon. He turned his comms on. "I'm with Kiko," he told her. "The building's unstable here, so you should refocus some of your vines on this section." "Heard," she muttered. He waited until he got confirmation, watching as her vines crept through the crumpled windows and cracked floors to stabilize the room. 4-point stabilized, Deku." "Let's get you out of here." He smiled down at Kiko, soft and reassuring. He moved the chair, then a chunk of the concrete, then finally freed Kiko's leg. He pulled a splint bandage from his belt, a design of Mei's based on Aizawa's capture weapon. He wound it around her leg before activating it, watching the material go rigid. Then gently he pulled her free of the remaining debris, hefting her into his arms. It was then that he noticed the battered All Might plush. "Hey," he grinned. "All Might's my favorite hero." "You said he taught you to be brave," she sniffled. "You're my favorite, so I thought he might make me brave too." "Well," he replied, heart warm. "You've been very, very brave today. You're doing great, Kiko. We're almost done," he promised. He crept back toward the entrance. Kiko clutched in his arms. He was extra careful to test each step, watching the floors and walls for collapse. He saw too late, gas dripping out of a ruptured portable camp stove, puddle oozing toward flayed open wiring that had come down from the walls. "Shiozaki, fire!" he called, but the gas had already caught, jumping toward the crumpled ceiling where Shiozaki's vines were shoring up a collapse. She screeched in pain over comms, ripping her vines back on impulse, and Izuku's heart raced as the ceiling started to cave in. He shifted Kiko in his arms to shield her, but the rubble came down too fast, concrete support smashing into his side and knocking him to the ground. His stomach dropped as her head hit the floor and concrete crashed into her arm. He rolled on top of her as the rubble fell, shielding her from the worst of it, but she'd already had a head injury, and the impact with the floor had knocked her out. He needed to get her out of there now. "The building's coming down. I have to smash my way out," he told her. "I can shore it up again," Shiozaki protested. "Kiko got hit by falling rubble. She's knocked out and her arm and leg are broken," he argued. "She can't afford to stay in here. I'm going." He powered up one for all, pushing off the rubble that had fallen on top of him and hoisting Kiko back into his arms as he went. The All Might plush was still wedged in the crook of her elbow. He didn't want to cause harm to the cops or medics outside, let alone to any civilians, so he made his decision, focusing 10% punches at the crumbling walls as he forced his way toward the street, feet catching on cracks in the floor and body buffeted by the falling debris. He gasped and coughed against fresh air as he finally busted through the outer wall, stumbling onto the street, with Kiko clutched to his chest. "Medic!" he gasped, stumbling toward the nearest ambulance. Kiko's mother ran toward them, crying, her name as Izuku had settled her onto the gurney. "My baby!" She sobbed, brushing hair away from Kiko's face. Izuku focused on the paramedic, describing her injuries as best as he could. As pain lanced up his side, he turned back toward Kiko, unfastening the mask from her face. "Why isn't she waking up?" she wailed. Izuku's eyes turned to her, and he spoke softly as he explained what had happened. He watched as he spoke, heart clenching as her gaze pulled back to her daughter, prone on the gurney. "She was awake when I reached her, but we had a complication that resulted in a ceiling collapse. She hit her head, but—" Smack. His head snapped to the side, cheek burning where she'd reared back and slapped him with all her strength, crack ringing like a gunshot despite the commotion. His heart raced in shock, blinking as he caught up to the pain burning across his face. She brandished the All Might plush at him, furiously. "Complication?" she screamed, slamming her fist against his chest. "You saved a stupid All Might doll! My daughter needed you, and you killed her!" He paled, his heart breaking. The cameras flashed. He couldn't breathe. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 9 of Fall Apart, Collect the Pieces. Chapter 10 will be next. I hope you all are still enjoying. I hate that mother at the end of this chapter. It was awful. Anyways, let me know your thoughts and reactions to this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.